Hi folks, Lou here, and I'm experimenting with a new recording method. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to talk about fundamentals of how Russia approaches warfare. Now, this may be useful if you're making a game that involves Russia, but it may also help you understand what's going on in the Russo-Ukraine war. Historically, Russia has tried to fight attritional wars. This is kind of the opposite of fighting using the indirect approach, which England particularly has done historically. If the Russians used up their resources before the enemy, as in World War I, they lost, and often they collapsed as a result. If they managed to continue when the enemy ran out of resources, as in World War II, they won. But notice in World War II, they had more help than in World War I, especially Lend-Lease. If we go back farther, the Russians wore out the Swedes in the Great Northern War in the early 1700s. That was Charles XII and Peter the Great. And the last great battle of that war actually occurred in Ukraine at Poltava. They even more or less wore out Napoleon, enabling them to drive the French out of Russia. On the other hand, in the Crimean War, somewhat after Napoleon, they were fighting the English and the French and others, and those folks could bring in their supplies to the Crimea by sea, whereas supply to Crimea by land was very, very difficult. And so the Russians could not exert their large number of people and so on, and they lost that war. So Russia relies on numbers, and they feel, especially where numbers can prevail almost predictably, they don't go in so much for individual big battles that might be decisive. And of course we see that very much in Ukraine. It's very, very much an attritional war, much like World War I, but with differences, of course. In World War I, the air didn't matter much. In Ukraine, the air matters a lot, both in airplanes and in drones. And one side has a superiority in airplanes, but can't exert it because of anti-aircraft defenses. And the other side has a superiority in drones, the Ukrainians. So in the Ukraine war, if the defenders can get enough help from the West, they will wear out the Russians, who may collapse. If they can't get enough help, the Russians may wear out the Ukrainians. But right now it's looking very much like the Russians are wearing out. They're having convalescents sent to the front because they're running out of manpower they can actually exert. They're running out of armored vehicles, so they're using motorbikes and civilian vehicles. They're having problems with oil because the Ukrainians are bombing their refineries with drones. The Russian economy is in bad shape. The Russian ruble was in really bad shape until recently they took it essentially off the market. So if you look up Russian ruble, you'll find it's at 86 to the dollar or something like that, which looks not too bad, but it's because nobody's trading rubles anymore, in effect. The Russian central bank is propping up the ruble, and we can no longer use it as a gauge of how things are going. Before the Russians decided to do that, it was 115 rubles to the dollar, and it was getting worse and worse. So, the Russians are trying their attritional style, but given the strength of defense at this time in history, it's not working, and they're in serious, serious trouble. Thanks for listening.